I am so excited to have her and the honor of introducing her, so please join me in welcoming Lisa Robertson.
Thank you. I'll put it in here. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank you so much for this great celebration. I think there's a Changing Seasons team that has worked so hard, as you can see, with the decorations, with the balloons and the flowers. With the food, there's so many, the cake pop, what are they called, cake balls? There's so many wonderful parts of this night, and I am so honored and excited to have all of you here and be celebrating with all of you. I just never thought when I was writing this book that this is what that we would end up here, and I'm just delighted to be here. So I wanted to just start on the path of life. I grew up in the mountains of Colorado, and in the mountains of Colorado, we walked to school. We walked to our friend's house, we walked to a ski hill, we walked to swim team, and we were always walking on a path. And a path is something that was just so familiar to me. I loved the path, and I began to learn a lot about paths because we were on them all day, every day. My sister's here from Colorado, and so we were talking about some of the paths that we walked on while we were growing up. And I think that, there's so many parts of a path that I find to be so comforting and so challenging, and I'll talk about more of it a little bit later, but the wonderful part of a path is a path always has a destination, and somebody has always gone before you on a path. You're never, ever the first person on a path. So when Tim and I were getting married, and I was living in Denver, and I was going to be a new bride, moving to Virginia Beach, changing so many parts of my life. And we got a wedding present, and in it was a card, and I don't remember what the wedding present was, but probably it was a forgettable wedding present, I don't know. But the card said, congratulations, Tim and Lisa, love the Ditchfields. And then it said Psalm 16:11. So after sort of things settled down, and I was writing my thank you notes, and I saw the card, I looked up, took a Bible, and I looked it up, and I started to read Psalm 16:11. And it says, God will make known the path of life. In his presence is fullness of joy, and at his right hand are pleasures forever. And I was so taken, I think primarily because it was talking about God having a path for life, for my life. And because I loved a path, the image of a path so much, and it meant so much to me, it was something that just resonated in my very being, that God had a path for my life. And just think about it, I had just moved from Denver, I just had gotten married, and then there were promises in that in his presence is fullness of joy. And I thought, not only does he have a path, he's gone before me, he's prepared it for me, his path has a destination, but in his presence is fullness of joy. And I thought, there is such a great comfort to know that as I walk on the path that God has given to me, that not only will it take me wonderful places, and it certainly has taken me on some great adventures, but it is also a path that will be filled with joy. And one of the things I've thought about a little bit is the difference between joy and happiness. Because sometimes we're not always happy, and sometimes on the path of life, being in the presence, fullness of joy, I'm not happy. And yet there is still this joy that undergirds all of it. And I thought a little bit, what is it about joy and being in God's presence that brings joy? And I think there's such comfort and strength to be in the presence of God, to knowing that he is your heavenly Father. And as my mother would say, he loves you more than anybody will ever love you. He knows you better than anyone will ever know you. And that is that knowledge and that comfort and that familiarity that God has with you. I may not have it with him, but he is so familiar with me, and he still loves me. And in that presence is fullness of joy. And so even when we're not happy, we can still have that strength. And the Bible talks about how the joy of the Lord is our strength. And we can still have that strength knowing that in his presence is joy. And if we're not happy, we'll get there. It doesn't, happy is an emotion, and it's not as much it doesn't anchor us like joy does. So I would really, when you leave, just think about in his presence is fullness of joy, and what the presence of God, as you walk through life, what that brings to you, and how that fulfills your life. So we got this card, and it just set out a tuning fork for me, where I began to really think about God having a path for my life, and that I would be in His presence. The presence would lead me into His joy, and that at His right hand would be fullness of joy and pleasures forever. And I thought about that, and the great promise of that is eternity, that we will be in a place of eternity for the rest of, we'll be filled with pleasures forever in eternity for the rest of all time. But as I would walk the path, I would be thinking about different things, and there are times we have to make a decision, and we have to choose, different paths. And always, I would say, is this God's best path for me? Because I want to walk the best path, not a second best path. And then there would be times when I think, I don't really want to go on this path, and I don't want to take the next step. And I'm okay right where I am, and the path scares me a little bit. And again, I just have this sense that God is just saying, I have to learn to trust Him, and I have to learn to walk with Him, and know that I can only journey on the path by taking the next step and by walking the next place with Him. But the wonderful part about the journey on the path is it's one step at a time. It's so doable, it's so manageable, and it just is, you take the next step. And I put it in another way, I think of it in another way, and it's do what you know you need to do. So I think there are times when I've been at a crossroads and I've been frantic about wondering what it is I should be doing or shouldn't be doing, and then I think to myself, what is my next step, and what do I know I should be doing? And when you break it down into such a simple, basic way, and I would say, and you pray about it, that you begin to understand, and you can see your next step. You can have it, but it might be, your next step might just be 1 inch at a time. So the whole image of the path is something that I have really hung on to for all of my life. So we go back through the promises that He has a path for us. God has prepared it for us. He has shown it to us, that He'll make it known to us. In His presence, if we stay close to Him, is joy, and then we'll have pleasures forever. So one of the things that my mother used to say to me, our mother used to say to us, is being in the center of God's will is the place of our greatest happiness. And again, that was another tuning fork in really being open to thinking, what is God's will for my life? And so often we don't know, and it's hard to know what that might be. And I think, again, we get into this place where we begin to have that conversation with the Lord, and where we can just say, show me where you are, show me what I need to do, show me, guide me onto the next step and guide me onto the next path. Well, as I was reading about the path of life, I started to look in the Bible, and I started to find other paths, which was a surprise to me. And there is a slippery path, there is a narrow path, there is a difficult path, and there is one that I really, really impressed me, and there is a path, it's called a hard path that flows with abundance. And I think that's probably one of the ones that was the most surprising path to me, that a hard path would flow with abundance. But it was also the one that meant the most to me. And the reason I loved this path, the hard path that flows with abundance, and I think the first time I ever experienced it was when I was 8 years old. And we lived in the mountains of Colorado. We lived in this perfect little community. As I said, we walked everywhere. We did have a ski hill. We had a little place to ice skate. We had a place we did swim team. We walked to school, and it was so secure and so ideal. And, we weren't afraid of anything. And we spent a lot of time outside by ourselves doing whatever we wanted to do. Those were the days. And yet, there was one day when I was 8 when evil came into that world. And evil came in and shattered our perfect little world. And what happened was, we had a 2-year-old sister, and she was outside playing and doing something that she had always done. And there was a neighborhood child who came into our yard, and he killed her. And there is, it's one of these stories that we really don't even have peace with it all these years later. How could it happen? Why did God allow it to happen? How did it happen? What was in that boy that he could do something so horrible and terrible? And yet we still, even now, and I've recently, within the past year, sat down and talked to my mother about it, just still trying to figure it out and trying to find some answers. But the reality was, she was killed, and she was killed by a child, another child. And obviously, that would send your whole family, your world, into a dark tailspin. And I think we were young enough where I think we dealt with it in different ways. Some of us, probably pretended it didn't happen. Others of us buried our grief. But here we had our mother who was out there, and she had to not only, it took a while, not that long, but a few weeks before they really identified that there were, children's handprints over her mouth and on her neck and things like that. So we had, a few weeks of questions, and then it all became very clear. And so there was a night our minister came over, and he had to tell us, what had happened. And we had already known she had died, but they were explaining a little bit more about how she had died. And I think at that point, the grief, the shock, the unreality of all of it, you can't wrap your mind around something like that. And then you're dealing with it as a family where you're all facing the same loss, and yet you're all dealing with it separately, but you really can't even comfort each other because everybody's in their own deep grief. And so me being Pollyanna, I kind of just, I was one of the ones that kind of pretended that it didn't happen because I couldn't process. I was in third grade, and I could not process the loss and the grief and even the impact that it had on our family. But I'm telling you this because it was such a dark time and a terrible time. But one of the things I wanted to just encourage you is that there were women in the community who began to pray for my mother. They didn't necessarily start out praying with her, but they just, from afar, they were praying for her. And they were praying that God would come to her. And she told me one time that she was on the phone and they were having she was having a conversation with somebody in the neighborhood and about the boy who had killed my sister, and she hung up the phone and she said, "Oh, God, help me." And it was just, that was just sort of a casual comment, and it wasn't really a deeply felt prayer. But when she said, "Oh, God, help me," she said she felt the presence of God for the first time in her life, perhaps, come into the room and just fill her with peace. And she knew that he was with her and that he was going to carry her and walk with her on this extremely difficult path. So the days went by, and she began to really grow in her understanding and in her faith, and she knew that the Lord really told her that she needed to forgive him because she was so full, understandably, of anger, of hatred, of bitterness, of questions, and toward the boy and toward his family. And so I think God just said, she was so filled with unforgiveness, and it was crushing her, and she needed to, get to a place where not only she could forgive him, but that she could tell him she forgave him. And so, so she dealt with that for a while, and one day she prayed, and she said, I am willing to forgive, but I don't have any forgiveness in me. And so if you want me to forgive, God, I need you to give me the forgiveness, and I need you to give me the opportunity. And I think, that was a pretty wise thing to do because she was asked to do something she couldn't do. So she put the burden on the Lord. She said, okay, if you think this is so important, you have to help me make it happen because I can't do this without you. And apart from you, I can't do it. But of course, you can imagine that she did have the forgiveness. She experienced God giving her the forgiveness for him. And then, of course, then there was the opportunity. And one day she looked out the window of our house, and she looked down the hill, and there he was by himself walking alone. And she just knew that this was the moment in time that God had called her to talk to him. And so she went outside and she called to him, and she said to him, I want you to know that we forgive you. And then she said, to her deep surprise, and then she followed it by saying, and we love you. And she said she was so shocked that she said those words, and she, sort of reached out to him. He never said a word to her, and he looked at her, I think, in total fear and frustration and ran away. But she, this is an interesting thing. She did what was right she did forgive. She did what she was asked to do, and it didn't really matter how he received it or how he responded, or even, a lot of times we'll say, I'll forgive if they ask me to, or whatever. We sort of put it on them. But she just followed the steps of the path that God had placed for her. And by doing those things and trusting the Lord to arrange the time, to give her the forgiveness, to give her the moment to talk to him, she entered a place of great freedom. And she entered a place where she was able then to live again. And I wonder sometimes what it would have been like had she continued to live. And because once she experienced the forgiveness, and she experienced the healing and the power that came and the freedom that came from forgiving, obviously that would impact our entire family. Jennifer and I weren't really with the program like Mom was with her faith, but we were watching. We were taking it all in, and little by little, Dad came along too. So we ended up going to this little Episcopal church in Golden, Colorado, and my big claim to fame in life is that Golden, Colorado is the home of Coors Brewery, and Holly Coors was my Sunday school teacher. And so, of course, I loved it. And Holly Coors had 6 sons, but that's beside the point. Even at 9 years old, I was looking. Anyway, but I got the pick of the litter. I found somebody way better. But it is kind of interesting that one of my high school friends, I invited, this is way off the topic, but I invited her over to do something, and I invited Grover Coors and his brother to come over, thinking that it was a great time for Grover Coors to meet me and sort of get to know me. Well, he married my friend. See, the god of romance strikes again. He met her. There was no turning back. I had no chance ever. But that was okay. I'm happy. But anyway, going back to the other things, I think about how often we can deal with our own issues of unforgiveness, and how we can carry that same burden and that weight and that torment. And if you allow yourself to be in those places of unforgiveness, you really oftentimes, at least I do, I get into places where I believe lies. I'm not even, the unforgiveness gets so twisted that the truth really gets distorted. And I think it's just, when you are under that cloud of unforgiveness, it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to really begin to ask the Lord to show you how to deal with it and to help you carry that burden, but more importantly, to help you have the forgiveness to extend to the people that you find you can't forgive. And it's because he's, a forgiving God, and he has that resource for you, because he wants us to live a life in freedom and in wholeness and in forgiveness, so that we're not carrying that burden and the torment of unforgiveness. So going on, we continued, on these difficult paths, and we had another opportunity. We've had lots of opportunities, but I had another opportunity with Abby, my youngest daughter, and she had many years of dental issues, serious dental issues, and we came into a place where we weren't, we got to a place where she was losing her 6 front teeth through some mistakes of some dental mistakes. And so we were in a place, and we had a dentist here tell us that and he was one of the premier dentists here, that he wasn't able to help us with Abby's issues because her bone was deteriorating, and they told us, we ended up in Atlanta, that the bone was going to go up into her nose, and her gum was deteriorating. And we had a crisis in our hand, and we really didn't know where the solution was or how to get to it. And so we began to pray, because that's what seemed to be where our answers might be. And I was in Atlanta one time. We went to Atlanta a lot, and she had several dental surgeries there, and then also in Florida, and it was several years of dental work. And I tell people that she's the girl with the $1 million smile. And so when you look at this, I want you to appreciate the $1 million smile. But in Atlanta, I was in a place, and I was definitely angry with the Lord, I'm thinking, because I know him and I love him, and I've always thought I was one of his favorites, and I'm thinking, I was kind of in that place where I'm thinking, thanks a lot, and if this is how you treat us, I don't think we're going to do this anymore, it's more, maybe I'll have more fun not loving you. But anyway, so I had a little temper tantrum with the Lord, and it was wonderful because I felt so comfortable having a temper tantrum, knowing that his love was so great, he was going to love me even after I got over being a brat. And so it was a very freeing, that was the first thing that was so freeing, is that it was okay for me to be angry and upset and have a temper tantrum, but I had to swing back around and say, and pray again. But the Lord, I really felt he said to me, will you trust me? And I wanted to think he said, can you trust me? And I know I could trust him, but I also knew I didn't want to because I was mad. But the question was, in my soul, will you trust me? And I was thinking specifically about Abby and these dental issues. And I thought, the word trust was one of those things that just came up, into my mind, and it was such a big word to me because I thought, when it says trust in the Lord with all your heart, do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. That's what it says in Proverbs. And here I am thinking, I know so much about you, and I have lived so much of my life honoring you, and now I don't want to trust you because you're really making me mad. And yet you're also my very best option. I had no alternative except to trust him. And so I went through that with Abby's surgery, and Abby was such a good sport. We never really talked about sort of the valleys of the time of the surgery because I didn't want her to know I was in one, and because she was such a good sport and had such a great attitude. But anyway, and I think when you are in those situations where you are being faced and you're mad, and disappointed would be the bigger word. I was so disappointed that we were here because it was so unnecessary. And yet I had this encounter with God that was life-changing, saying, will you trust me? And of course, when you're in a situation where it's you and God Almighty, of course you're going to trust him. You have to, because that was all we had, really, and in that time. And so I learned at that time that trusting God was not only my decision, it was also my choice. And we had been given free will, and so it's not that we're going to fall into that. We're going to choose to trust God. We're going to choose to think about him. We're going to choose to pray. And it's all part of how we live and how we live our lives. But doing all of this and writing the book, and one of the things I think I would say to encourage you is that in the most difficult paths that I've been on, and I know enough of you well enough to know that in the most difficult paths that you've been on, that is often where you see the love, the tender love of God. That is often where you see the miracles that God does, the surprises that he has for you, the way he knows you, as my mother would say, better than anyone knows you, and understands you and loves you more than anyone ever will know you, understand you, or love you. And I just think that's what makes it worth it to me to begin to seek and ask, to find God's path. Another thing I learned on this path is that, I used to think that when you follow God and you're on his path, and you're praying for a miracle, there are several ways a miracle would happen. One is that God would just do the miracle for you. And we all say, we want that. We don't want to go, agonize over it. Another way would be, I have to be good enough to deserve the miracle. I have to earn the miracle. And we just have sort of this, we have sort of a twisted understanding of how God works. But I think what I've learned in this is that so many times the greatest work that I've seen in my life has been when I have partnered with God, when I have worked with him in whatever it is that we're trying to do. And then I started to look at, surprise, you read the Bible, and guess what? They partnered with God. And I looked at when Jesus was doing different miracles in the Bible, and I think when he was out and the disciples were on the boat, and the boat was, it was stormy, and he's walking on the water, and he says, get out of the boat. The miracle didn't happen until they got out of the boat, Another miracle would be when they were fishing. They had been fishing all night long and hadn't caught a fish. And then, so Jesus appears to the disciples and he says, hey, buddies, throw your net on the other side of the boat. And again, it's when it was in that partnership, when he appeared and he gave them direction, that then they pulled up nets that were so full they were bursting with fish. And probably broke the nets, is what I think it says. But I think so often when we are in situations, we need to look at the ways that God is calling us to work with him, and where he's leading us to partner with him in doing different projects and doing in different relationships. I mean, it spans every part of our lives. And I think there's a verse in Isaiah that says, I am the Lord who teaches you what is good for you and leads you along the paths that you should follow. And again, I think in that partnership, he's teaching us and he's leading us along the paths we should follow. And I would, again, and that's what encourages me to just, to keep asking and keep, seeing where that might be. Another important part that I learned is I love the word ask. And I think Jesus teaches, ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. And over and over and over again, throughout the Bible, there are the words, ask me, ask me, ask me. And again, I think, I feel sort of that I've been inadequate in that I haven't asked. I sort of move through my life taking things as they are, and I'm not really thinking about asking and thinking about how I want to invite the Lord into different situations, how I want to invite him and partner with him on things that are going on. But I think you can ask God, ask him simple things. I've been known to ask him for a parking place, but I don't want to admit it. That's like the lowest of the low. But I have done that, and you know what happened? I was in Boston. I was working in Boston at an ad agency, and I had to drive into downtown Boston. I had a meeting, and I was right on time for it, but I couldn't find a parking place. And I knew that if I drove around, I was never going to get there on time. And I prayed, and I said, Lord, I really need a parking place. At the front door of the ad agency, a car pulled out, and I just thought, yay, and there's a verse that says you have not because you ask not, and I thought I might have missed it if I hadn't, the car probably would have pulled out, but I wouldn't have noticed it. But I just think there's so many little things, and people say, no, don't waste God's time asking for a parking place, and I think there's probably some truth to that, but I also think, he delights in loving us. And, that silly story about a parking place proved a deep point to me. And, so I've been asking ever since for lots of things. But the other thing is, so we ask God, and don't be afraid to get into that relationship where you talk to him and where you think about him and where you take him with you on your walks and talk to him about what's going on. Another thing that is so important is that we partner with God and we just invite him in doing whatever it is we're doing, and you will see amazing things. You will, I find, I have taught Bible studies for many years, and people will say, oh, I really like that lesson, and I think God makes me so much smarter than I really am, because I pray, oh God, help me, teach me. And somebody will say, oh, I loved it when you said whatever it is I said. I don't remember ever saying it. And it's like, God made me so smart. He's speaking to somebody's heart, and I haven't even said anything. I didn't say that. But I think there's so much that he wants to do to show himself and his love to me, but also to show himself and his love to each one of you, and each one of you in every relationship you have. And another one is that we trust the Lord. And I think so asking God would be one of the main things I've learned, but to trust him with what he's doing and to continue to keep him in the forefront of all that you're doing. And then the other thing is to be thankful. And I think there's such power in thanking God. And I think thanking God is a way to underscore your trust in him. And just, if you can't thank him for what's happening in your life, you can thank him that he's with you. You can thank him that he knows your next step. That you can thank him that he goes before you in all things. So it's such an important time for us to really, take the changing seasons. And I will say the reason that we have that we call this changing seasons is because there's seasons in our life that are dormant and hard and cold And there's seasons in our life like spring where we're planting and things are growing. And look how beautiful this room is with all the spring flowers. There's seasons in our life like summertime where we're sitting on the beach and resting. And seasons in our life like fall where we're planting and working and preparing for what we have ahead. And I think that's just so true on the path of life, that we really become so aware of where we are in our lives, where we are in our seasons, and just invite the Lord to come into every single part of it. So I want to just close by saying that God has a path for each one of you. And all of us have, He walks before you. He walks beside you. You are never the first person on your path. You are never alone on your path. Your path has a great destination. I don't know of a path that goes nowhere. And I only can know of paths that have good destinations and that where somebody's prepared them. And I would say that when you walk on that path with Him, that's where you're going to see the miracles. That's where your joy is going to be. And that's when you learn to trust Him. Then He will carry so many of the burdens of your heart. If you can say, God, I just trust you to help me get through this circumstance, this heartache, this situation. Because when you say things like that, it helps you open your eyes to see where He's moving and to see what God is actually doing for you. And it's a miraculous relationship, but it's a wonder to think that the Creator of this world loves us so much that He came, He died for us, and He walks with us every day of our lives. And He has a path that will blow your mind and that will be the great adventure. And I know, and it will be filled with joy. And I just want to say thank you so much. I hope you like the book. I am delighted to walk with all of you on this path. And I just think in a year, we can all get together and talk about where we've been, what we've done, and where we've seen God move, because we're going to have some great stories. But thank you. I love being here. I love being with all of you. And again, thank you for all the women who've worked so hard to make this night so great. So it's time to party. That's right. I forgot. This is what I don't.
She's trying to run off the stage. We're not letting you get off that easy. We have a few minutes for questions. So if anyone has a question for our published author.
That sounds so funny.
I know it does. Or for my mom. Raise your hand. We have a microphone, but I think usually you can be heard. We can repeat your question. Are there any questions? Yes.
Lisa, have you ever looked back and said, "Oh, I think I took the wrong path"?
That is a great question.
I didn't want to get into that, but yes.
She asked if you ever looked back and thought you took the wrong path.
Do I do this one? Yes, and again, being a mountain girl, I had this experience, and I've been thinking about it recently, where I was at Rocky Mountain National Park, and there was this little path, and I was at this retreat, and I thought, oh, I'm in my 20s, and I'm awesome, and I'm a mountain girl, and I can handle this. Okay, you see pride, arrogance, I had all those things going ahead of me. So I took the path, and I walked and walked and walked, and it was a nice little path, and then it got a little steeper and a little harder, and the sun began to set, and on hard paths in Colorado, they mark them with the top of like a Campbell's soup can. They will nail a tree so that you stop finding the path, you start looking for the soup cans on the tree. So I was following the soup cans on the tree and walking, and I had this sense where I kept walking this way and my camp was that way. And I kept thinking, if I created a path, I would loop it around and bring it safely back to the camp, and that would be that. But it wasn't going that way. So eventually, finally, I wised up, and in the dark, almost dark, and I turned around and I walked back. And I thought about that a lot because I was on the wrong path. And I had warnings, and I had that feeling inside that I was not going the way I should go. And I walked a while before I turned around and kept getting farther and farther away. And I think, how often are we walking in our own lives and we are walking the wrong way? But I think God gives us the instinct in our gut that we are going the wrong direction, and we need to pay attention and listen to that and not keep going our merry way. Well, when I got back to camp finally, and it was almost dark, I looked up, I wanted to see what path I was on, because it was a real path. And I discovered, to my great horror, that I was on a 65-mile path to Denver. And I think, you know what, I would have never, I mean, I could have gotten there, but I just think in life, you know, whether you're on a physical path going the wrong direction or whether you're on a path in your life where you're making the wrong decisions, don't keep going. Look at the signs, feel what's happening inside of you, and the wonderful thing is God allowed me to, I mean, I think in life God allows us to turn around and go back. So I think it works in real life walking paths and in life when we're choosing to live the wrong path. That was a great question. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, Nancy.
When and how did you decide on this path to write this book?
When and how did you decide the path to write the book?
All right. If I tell you the truth, okay, this is the truth, but it's going to sound really stupid. I told this truth to my mother when a year after it happened, and she told me I was self-absorbed. So bear with me. I did a junior year abroad when I was in college. Okay, let's say hi to Sweetbriar College. But with Sweetbriar, I went to Spain, and I was, touring around Europe, and I was in a cathedral, I think in Italy, watching the pigeons fly way up high, and I was by myself, and I was just sort of thinking about life, and just thinking about whatever, and I felt like I just had this sense inside of me that I would marry somebody famous, and that I would write a book, and they seemed so totally unrelated. And it seems such a bizarre thought, but I remembered it obviously. And so as time went on, I married somebody in a famous family, and when I did that, then all of a sudden I thought, I'm pregnant with a book, because part of that little in the rafters in the cathedral had come true, and I would say that I have felt pregnant with a book for many, many years. And so I would just, go different places, and I would write different things, and sometimes I would wake up in the morning and I'd have an idea. But when you read about the paths in the Bible, there are so many. It's almost hard not to think about them and to write about them, because there's so many. And I had no idea that a path was that prevalent in my faith.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
One
Yes.
more.
I guess they taught us that we're only going to go to Sweetbriar for 2 years and then go to Colorado. So what changed there?
Springtime. I did think I would go to Sweetbriar for 2 years and then go back to the University of Colorado. I wasn't, as a freshman, a senior in high school, I wasn't quite ready for the University of Colorado. I just knew that was a little bit more than I could handle. We have somebody with children in there. So I went to the beauty of Sweetbriar College. And I think what happened there, at the end, part of it was springtime. My freshman year, I was ready to come home, and my father said, "You can come home. It's okay." And I said, I was feeling so defeated. I didn't want to come home with that great sense of defeat. And so I decided I would stay through that freshman year, and it was springtime. And I had never seen anything more beautiful or had more fun. And I think I began to sort of relax and decide, I told the story yesterday that I was a mountain girl arriving at Sweetbriar with mountain boots and lederhosen before anybody had any of that. And they all had Pappagallo shoes and sundresses, and before I had any of that. And when I left, I had Pappagallo shoes and sundresses and a senior ring. And so but again, and my mother would say, "I just think God wants you there. I don't know why." And I didn't know anything. I didn't really believe in that, but I thought if it's good enough for my mom and she thinks that's a good reason, well, I'm going to stay until I have a better thing to do. And, and of course, by the time I graduated, I just could not have been more grateful for the Lord keeping me there and persevering, because it was such a great and rich experience. And look at all my friends.
And what else did you find at Sweetbriar?
Oh, Well, okay, at Sweetbriar, I found my faith at Sweetbriar. Let's start at the very beginning.
Oh.
I found friends at Sweetbriar, and I found a husband. And we're still married, and we have 5 children, and I think, and I think that was God's great blessing, is when I think about how important, I was unhappy at times, but God kept me there because that was where I was supposed to be. And I'm so grateful for all of that. So
I think last week I heard you say that you knew you would be happier being unhappy at Sweetbriar and enduring it than if you had gone home.
yeah,
You would have been unhappier there,
yeah.
living with your dad
And Mom.
and mom, feeling defeated. So
But you see, this is where I think, going back to being in the center of God's will is the place of your greatest happiness. And I think so, even if sometimes I wasn't happy, it was the best place for me because God was doing a great work in my life. So that, for a moment, for a week, for a month, I'm miserable, so what? It was the center of God's will, and that was the place of my greatest happiness. And I think that's one of the things that Mom said that I've never forgotten, because there have been times when I've really used that. Is this the center of God's will for my life? And I thought, I'm happier here being unhappy than I would be being somewhere else. But those moments, that changes. That changes.
okay, do we have one more question? Yes, Catherine. Oh, we'll do both of you. Okay, Catherine first and then Jody.
In the book, your mom shines through as part of your life. And I think you just can't help it when you tell your personal story. And I think that so those of us who know you would say that you have ended up in that same role and with your own family. Do you want to talk about your mom?
Okay, is this my sister-in-law? I love her. My mom is, she is a pioneer in her own right, and she went to Cornell, she grew up in Pennsylvania, and then she wanted to do something, on her own. So she left the security of the East Coast and went to Denver by herself to teach school at a private girls' school where we all ended up going to school. But she was that much of a pioneer, and she met my father out there, who was actually in Denver. He was from the East Coast, he went to Yale, and there was this move in the 50s of people going west. After World War II, there was just this great move west. So populated Denver and Phoenix and probably right on out to California. And so and then the funny thing is that we ended up buying a house because when they got married, they met out there and they met on a blind date. They were engaged in 3 weeks and married in 3 months, okay? And they were married for 65 years until Dad passed away. So but anyway, they ended up living in the mountains. So because all they wanted was a mountain view. And so when I think about her raising us, she was loud. Sometimes our house was not neat, so she was imperfect, but she was so strong in what she did. And when in the aftermath of the death of my sister, she really determined that she was going to live and not die. And I think she said, one of the things she said to us recently is if she hadn't found the forgiveness of Christ, she would have killed herself. And I think that knowing her as the strong woman, the leader. She started an international business that my sister now runs in the 60s, way ahead of her time. I mean, she was just way ahead of her time in so many areas. And yet, she's 93, she's still sharp as a tack. She wins a lot of money in blackjack. and she's a delight. And I just think, it really is, and I think so much of her faith brought her such joy and gave her the strength to endure the heartaches with the confidence. And I guess she's probably the one that taught us the most about trusting God, because she had every reason not to, and yet her trust in the Lord was her strength, and we watched her live because of that.
Okay, Jody, last question.
Okay, this is great setup, Catherine, because my question's about your mom. It's not a question so much as a comment. I love that you said
She said to me one time in one of those moments between a mother and a teenager, she said, if I were perfect, you would worship me. And, and God doesn't want me to be perfect because he wants you to worship him. You can use it on a husband too.
All right, thank you. Let's give her one more round of